There are evenings, my dear friends, that appear entirely unremarkable from the outside. A handful of candles, a winter fire burning low, the sound of a fortepiano drifting from the next room, and underneath all of it, something that is very much a war. I want to tell you about one such evening. I came across the account in an old letter, faded now, the ink gone brown at the edges, written by someone who was present and who understood, as she wrote it, that she was setting down something worth keeping. Her name was Helena Wynne. She was 27 years old, the daughter of a clergyman in Devonshire. Her father very much alive, I should tell you now, though ill enough that winter that he could not travel, and that fact matters to this story. She had taken a position as a lady's companion to old Mrs. Stool, a widow of no particular consequence, who was a distant relation of the Morecambes of Hawthorne Hall, and had been invited to stay the season. Which meant Helena had come too, in the capacity that ladies' companions always come, useful, present, and entirely without standing. She noticed the arrangement room, she entered the drawing room, for the evening's card party. The room had been set with careful intention. Lady Morecambe. And I say this without pleasure, because I have no pleasure in such people, was a woman who understood the architecture of social rooms the way a general understands the architecture of a battlefield. She knew what every chair meant, what every position communicated, and she arranged her rooms accordingly. The chairs were set in groups. Lady Morecambe's circle near the fire, the Langton family at the card table, the Pallisers beside the window, and for Mrs. Stool, who was 83 and nearly blind and required a chair with arms, a cushion, and a position away from the draught, there was a perfectly acceptable chair placed near the far wall, beside the door that led to the service passage. There was a small stool beside it. Not a chair, a stool. Helena looked at it for a moment. She understood what it meant. She sat down on it. Mrs. Stool, who could not see clearly at a distance of more than a few feet, patted Helena's hand and said, "Is it comfortable, dear?" Helena said, "Quite comfortable, thank you," and meant neither yes nor no, but simply the truth. She was there, she had received the message, and she had decided the correct response to a small cruelty was not a large one. Viscount Hexam had arrived that afternoon. I should tell you about him, because the accounts of such men are often wrong in both directions, too cold or too heroic, and I want to give you the true version, which is more interesting than either. Lord Anselm Cresswell, Viscount Hexam, was 36 years old. He had a reputation for brevity that many people rate as arrogance, and some as shyness, and a few as intelligence, and the few were correct. He had been invited to Hawthorne Hall because Lady Morecambe's eldest daughter was of an age to be married, and because the Viscount had an income to make that a desirable outcome. He was aware of this. He had accepted the invitation in a moment of social obligation and had been, since his arrival, conducting himself with the impeccable courtesy of a man who has committed to something he has already regretted. He noticed Helena when she came in. Not specifically, not yet. Only the peripheral fact of a woman taking a low seat near the wall, with the particular stillness of someone who has already assessed the room and found her place within it. He was placed for the evening at Lady Morecambe's right, the position of honor. He sat in it with the correct expression and turned his attention to the room. He saw the stool. He saw who was sitting on it. He reached for his wine and watched, with the patience of a man who has nothing better to occupy him, as Helena Wynne leaned toward the old woman beside her and said something that made the old woman's face change. The particular change of a face that has not expected to be spoken to directly and has found it unexpectedly pleasant. The old woman began to talk. "My dear friends, I want to pause here for just a moment. Because what happens next in this room is what this story is really about, and I want you to have the full weight of it before we arrive there. If you haven't yet subscribed to Moonlight at Ravenwood, this would be a good moment to do so. We tell stories here, quiet ones and dramatic ones, and we think you might like to stay for both. now back to Hawthorne Hall. Mrs. Sawtell had been a schoolmistress. She had taught for 40 years in various posts, including 10 years at a girls' school in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which she had reached by ship and which she described when anyone asked as the most illuminating years of her life. No one at Hawthorne Hall had asked. She had been brought north as a courtesy relation, installed in the acceptable chair beside the service door, and left entirely to her own devices, which were limited by her eyesight but not, as it turned out, by her memory or her considerable opinions on the education of women. Helena asked. She asked because she had learned in 3 months of companionship that Mrs. Sawtell's silence was not emptiness but a cap placed over something that had been full for a very long time and had not been opened. She asked because it was the right thing to do, and because she was genuinely interested, and because the alternative was to sit on the stool in silence and arrange the room in ways designed to communicate what she thought of Helena's presence in it. So she asked, and Mrs. Sawtell began. Across the room, the Viscount listened to the conversation at Lady Morecambe's card table and watched the woman on the stool lean forward to catch every word from the old lady beside her. He watched the way she asked questions. Not the questions of a person performing interest, but the questions of a person who wants to know the answer. He watched the old woman's hands move as she described something, some building or landscape from 40 years gone, and he thought that he could not recall, at any gathering this season, seeing someone who was precisely and entirely where they had chosen to be, regardless of where they had been placed. It was during the second hand of cards that Lady Palliser made her remark. She made it lightly. That was always how these things were done. Lightly, as though commenting on the weather, so that the speaker could later claim they had merely been making conversation. Lady Palliser was a woman of standing in that particular room, which meant what she said landed with the weight of standing behind it. She said she had heard something rather interesting about young Miss Octavia Langton. And was it true that she had been seen on Thursday afternoon, walking unchaperoned with young Mr. Havelock near the lower field? Not young Mr. Havelock, she clarified, with the smile of a woman who knows the distinction she is making. The other Mr. Havelock, the younger one, the one with the reputation. The room went still. Miss Octavia Langton, who was 19 and seated at the far side of the card table, went white. Not the white of guilt. The white of a young woman who has just understood that a true thing is being made to sound like a false one by a single deliberate substitution. Lady Morecambe began assembling a response with the rapid efficiency of a woman who has managed social situations for 30 years. But before she could deliver it, Helena set down her teacup. She was on the stool by the wall. She was a lady's companion with no standing in this room, and everyone present understood that, and she understood it too. She also understood something else. That on Thursday afternoon she had been present. She had been walking with Miss Octavia Langton near the flower field, in the exact capacity of companion and chaperone was her employment. She had been there. She had seen who Octavia spoke to, and for how long. The younger Mr. Havelock had not been within a mile of that field. She knew this because she had a constitution that required daily walking regardless of weather, and because she kept notes in a small book she carried for the purpose of recording what she observed. The date, the hour, who was present, a habit developed from her father, who was a clergyman of methodical habits and had raised her accordingly. She said, from the stool beside the service door, in the clear and even voice of a woman, providing a correction to factual information. I believe Lady Palliser may be thinking of a different afternoon. I was with Miss Langton on Thursday near the lower field from 2:30 until nearly 4. I have it in my notes. She paused. The only young man we encountered was a farmer's son driving a cart of hay, who touched his cap very correctly and continued on his way. There was no one else. The room produced a silence. The first kind of silence, the kind where 30 people have received a correction so specific and so calm that it has arrived before the damage could consolidate, and are now collectively processing the revision. Lady Palliser recovered with the speed of long social practice. She looked at Helena down the length of the room with the expression of a woman recalibrating. "How charming," she said. "The companion keeps notes." There was in this sentence the particular barb of someone who has found the most cutting possible framing for an incontrovertible truth. Yes, the companion keeps notes. And the notes are correct. And isn't that somehow amusing? The room went silent again. The second kind, the silence of people deciding which way to fall. The Viscount set down his cards. He did not hurry. He was not by nature a man who hurried. He rose from his chair at Lady Morecambe's right. The chair of honour. The chair for which the entire footing had been arranged, with the particular deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in performing uncertainty for the benefit of the room. He picked up his chair. He carried it. He carried it from Lady Morecambe's right hand, past the card table, past the Langtons, past the Pallisers at the window, down the full length of the drawing-room, and he set it beside the small stool near the service door. He sat in it. The room did not breathe. He looked at Lady Palliser with the expression he had worn all evening, correct, composed, except that it now contained something that had not been there before. A quality of finality, the expression of a man who has placed his chair somewhere and is entirely prepared to remain in it. He turned to Mrs. Sawtell. "Mrs. Sawtell," he said, "I understand you taught in Nova Scotia." The old woman looked up, faintly startled. "I did, my lord, for 10 years. "I should very much like to hear about it," he said, "if you are willing." Mrs. Sawtell, who had not been asked about Nova Scotia by anyone at Hawthorne Hall in 6 weeks, looked at the Viscount with the expression of a woman encountering an unexpected but entirely welcome development. "Well," she said, "it would take some time." "I have time," he said. She began. "My dear friends, do you see it? A man who could have said any number of clever things, a pointed correction, a rebuke delivered with precision. He said none of them. He picked up his chair. He walked the length of the room. He sat beside the woman on the stool and asked the old woman next to her about Nova Scotia. Sometimes the most powerful statement a person can make is simply where they choose to sit." The evening continued. The room reconfigured itself around the new geometry, the Viscount at the far wall beside the companion and the old schoolmistress, which rearranged everything Lady Morecambe had planned in ways she would require the remainder of the week to fully process. The card game resumed eventually. Conversation resumed eventually. But the room had shifted in the way rooms shift when something happens in them that cannot be undone. After the evening, Helena was moving through the corridor toward the back stair. Her position did not require her to remain for the full drawing-room program when she heard a step behind her. Miss Wynne. She turned. He was standing in the corridor with the expression she had seen at the far end of the drawing-room, not the social expression. The other one. "My lord." "You had your notes ready," he said. She looked at him. "I always have my notes." "Why?" She considered this. "Because I was raised by a man who believed that the truth is only useful if you can demonstrate it," she said. "And I have found in my position that the truth requires demonstrating rather more often than it should." He was quiet. "Most people in your position would have let it pass." "I know," she said. "I found I couldn't." "Miss Langton," he said, "you are fond of her." "She is 19, Helena said plainly. "She has done nothing wrong. The account was false. The falseness was harmful, and I was in a position to correct it, regardless of where in the room that position happened to be." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been managing this household without appearing to manage it." "I do my work," she said, "and I stay in my domain. The stool by the wall is not my preference, but it has its advantages. You can see the whole room from there." Something moved in his expression. "You saw me watching you." "Yes." And you said nothing. I had no occasion to, she said. You were watching from the correct end of the room. The corridor was dim, the sounds of the drawing room muffled behind several doors. I noticed you before the Palliser remark, he said. She waited. Mrs. Sawtell had not spoken, not genuinely, since the first evening I arrived. I attempted conversation with her at dinner on Wednesday. She was polite and brief and retreated. He paused. Tonight she spoke for 40 minutes without drawing breath. She described a school she helped build in Halifax, with her own hands. She laid the foundations, Helena said quietly. The beams too at one point. I did not know that. No one knew, she said, because no one asked. He looked at her with something warmer than the drawing room had permitted. I should like to call tomorrow, he said. If you are willing to receive me. She knew what this meant. She also knew the complications, and she said them directly, because she had not managed 3 months at Hawthorne Hall by being otherwise. I am a lady's companion, she said. Lady Morecambe placed me on a stool by the serviced door. A call from you will complicate my position considerably, for me, not for you. I know, he said. She will not be pleased. No, he agreed, without particular concern, which she found, against her own considered judgment, entirely compelling. My father is in Devonshire, she said. He is unwell. He cannot travel. I intend to write to him first, he said, and to visit when the weather permits, with his consent. He paused. If you give yours. She looked at him. He had, she noticed, already thought this through. 10 o'clock, she said. Mrs. Sawtell rests until noon. 10 o'clock, he said. He called at 10. Lady Morecambe received the news with the expression of a woman encountering a problem she had not planned for, which was new for her, because Lady Morecambe planned for everything. The plan had been simple and good. The Viscount would see Helena's position clearly defined by the evening's arrangements. He would understand the hierarchy. He would direct his attentions accordingly. It was a plan that had served, in various forms, for 30 years of house parties and winter gatherings at Hawthorne Hall. She had not planned for the chair. That had been his decision, and she had not, in 30 years of arranging rooms, anticipated it. He was shown to the small sitting room where Helena conducted her mornings with Mrs. Sawtell. Helena was at the writing desk, completing correspondence that she performed each morning at this hour. She looked up when he came in with the same composed attention she had given everything since the previous evening, not performing ease actually at ease. My lord. Miss Wynne. He looked at the room. The good practical order of it. The notes stacked at the corner of the desk. The small book she had mentioned. Lady Morecambe was not waiting in the corridor, he said. No, she agreed. Were you expecting her to be? Yes, she said honestly. He sat in the chair across the desk. Not the formal reception chair, but the closer one where Mrs. Sawtell's visitors sat for morning calls. They talked for 50 minutes, about her father and his parish, about Mrs. Sawtell's school in Halifax, and what it had cost to build it, and what it had given in return. About the particular difficulty of being precise in rooms that do not reward precision. About what it is to hold opinions you are not permitted to voice because of where someone has decided to put your chair. He listened with the full attention of a man who is not performing listening. She noticed the difference immediately. He called again Thursday, and the Monday after. He sent, with a brief note, a volume of essays on natural philosophy that he said she might find relevant to a conversation they had had, which she did. He attended the same assembly. She attended in the village the following week, which was not a coincidence, and which both of them understood perfectly. He did not conceal his intentions. He was, she had come to understand, a man who had decided something and was not interested in obscuring it. The stool did not reappear. Lady Morecambe made her recalculations in private. It was on a Tuesday morning in late February that he came earlier than expected with the expression of a man who has spent 3 weeks thinking carefully and has arrived at the far edge of careful thinking. He spoke to Lady Morecambe for 30 minutes behind closed doors. What was said, I cannot tell you exactly. What I can tell you is that the conversation ended in the manner she had observed all conversations with Lord Hexam end, at precisely the conclusion he had intended from the start. Then he came to the sitting room. Helena was at the writing desk. She had known he was coming, not because she had been told, but because she had been paying close attention for 3 weeks, and she understood by now the shape of his decisions. He sat in the chair across the desk. I have written to your father, he said. He has replied. She set down her pen. He has given his blessing, the Viscount said, conditionally on speaking with you himself first, which I think, and here something shifted in his expression, something that had been contained all season and was contained no longer, is entirely correct of him. You are moving quite quickly, she said. I have found, he said, with the directness that was his whole character, that I am not well suited to moving slowly when I am certain about something. He looked at her, full attention. The kind she had first observed across a drawing-room from the wrong end. I am certain about this. She thought about the stool, the service door. The chair carried down the length of a room by a man who had not said a single word of explanation afterward, because the chair had been the explanation. She thought about Mrs. Sawtell's hands describing foundations laid in Halifax. She thought about 50 minutes, at a writing desk, and letters that said precisely what they meant, and a man who listened without performing it. I will not be quietly managed, she said. I had gathered that, he said. I have opinions about things beyond my immediate domestic sphere. I had also gathered that. And I have notes, she said. I will always have notes. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the first entirely uncontained expression she had seen from him. Not quite a smile, but the genuine thing underneath whatever a smile is made of. Yes, he said, I am counting on it. She said yes. She left Hawthorne Hall on a Thursday morning in March. She carried Mrs. Sawtell's correspondence neatly tied, and her father's letters, and the small notebook with the careful records, including the entry for that Thursday in February, when Miss Octavia Langton had walked near the lower field, and no one had done anything improper at all. She kept the notebook. The truth is only useful if you can demonstrate it, and she had not unlearned that. Mrs. Sawtell embraced her at the door. The old woman smelled of lavender and wool, and she said, "Write to me when you get to Halifax," and Helena laughed, genuinely, for the first time in many months. Lord Hexam was at the front of the house with the carriage. He had come himself, not sent the carriage, but come, which was a statement requiring no elaboration. He handed her in. He sat beside her. The carriage moved through the iron-grey March morning, the fields still winter bare, the road winding south toward Devonshire and her father, and everything that came next. She looked back once at Hawthorne Hall. The windows, the door, the small sitting room she would not return to. Any regrets, he said. No, that weren't already there before this morning, she said. He was quiet a moment, then, Mrs. Sawtell tells me the harbour in Halifax is extraordinary in August. She looked at him. She told you about the harbour. At considerable length, he said. I had arrived for the rhododendrons, and she took a detour. A pause. I didn't mind. She looked out the window at the road opening ahead. She thought about a stool by a service door, about a man who made no speeches, about a chair carried the full length of a room in plain view of everyone, because some things do not require a speech, because some things are already said by the doing of them. She thought he moved his chair. She thought, I am glad of it. And perhaps that is what stays with me most. Dear friends, about this particular story, not the false remark that was corrected, not the room that had to rearrange itself around a new truth, not even the ending, which was, by every account I have found, entirely deserved. What stays with me is simpler than any of that. A woman placed where she was not valued, doing her work with precision and without complaint. Seeing the entire room clearly from a corner no one thought to consider significant. And a man who looked at that corner and decided, quietly, without asking anyone's permission, that he would rather be there than anywhere else. Subscribe to Moonlight at Ravenwood, dear friends, and come back to us by the fire soon. The stories are always here, and every ending we tell you, I promise, is one that was earned.